Hello and welcome to another edition of
Indian Times.
with Kevin and Leo.
Great, yes. The week of February 22nd, and, good week to be Indigenous. A lot going on this week. A lot of tragedy, unfortunately. There's a school shooting in Florida, Parkland, Florida, this week. And, a lot of senseless tragedy there. I thought that was something maybe we could just start with. And it was something that I sort of debated for about half a second, deciding whether we should talk about it, because it's not necessarily something that directly affects Indian country right now, because there weren't any Native American victims or survivors that I know of. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about the safety of our children in schools, and I think that issue certainly transcends any issues of race or tribal affiliation. I think we're all affected by this, so I think it's something we definitely
it
should
affects
talk about.
it affects the entire country.
Yeah,
and it was crazy. It's crazy what the world is going through right now, because there's this massacre at this school and 17 people die, and so these youth all start speaking up and they start this movement and they're trying to get these guns banned. And so then the Republicans, not all Republicans, but a lot of Republicans now and a lot of the right-wing media is actually trying to do a smear campaign against these
Isn't
youth.
that crazy?
Like, how do you do a smear?
How do you turn this against the victims?
How do you justify that?
Yeah, they're calling some of these, student survivors paid actors.
Paid actors.
Crisis actors, they call them.
Yeah, I'm not even a paid actor.
Well, now, come on. Now.
But we call them paid actors.
Yeah,
and they're grieving. They're still in the grieving process, and they're speaking out while it's still fresh. Which that's really brave of them, and that's really selfless of them, because right now is the time. Right now is when they have to speak up while it's still fresh, while it's on everybody's mind, because it's crazy how fickle the nation is.
Well, how quickly we forget. We'll be talking about Trump and Russia in the next week. We'll quickly forget about this tragedy and move on to the next one. Mm-hmm. But I do think that this whole smear campaign against the student survivors really speaks to the desperation of conservatives who are really worried about, let's face it, losing their guns, their AR-15s. There's a push right now, and it's being led by these student protesters who are some of the most eloquent people I've ever heard talk on this subject.
Yeah.
They're really educated about it, they're passionate, and they're speaking from direct experience, and you just can't beat that, Yeah. And it's frightening to conservatives who are holding on to their guns and who want to please the NRA and the gun lobby, who are terrified of losing their seats of power, if they don't get this campaign funding from the NRA. They're terrified of these student protesters who, they don't see any way to stop other than call them paid actors,
Yeah.
So
And we got hundreds of millions of guns in America.
Yeah.
I can't believe that when they were saying that on national news, how much guns we actually already have that exist in America, and they're still pumping them out. And they were also saying that Florida is one of the easiest places to buy guns.
Mm-hmm.
At 18 with an expired license, you can go in and buy a gun in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I did not realize that.
Mm-hmm.
But that they're also talking about bringing guns into schools.
Sure.
And if you don't really think it's a Native issue, you gotta realize that it is, because it has happened in Native country.
Yeah. Absolutely.
In Red Lake, right?
Yeah, it was Red Lake, Minnesota, back in March of 2005. There was a young man there named Jeffrey Weiss who decided one day to kill his grandfather and his grandfather's girlfriend. His grandfather was a tribal police officer. So after he commits those two murders, he steals his grandfather's police weapons and vest, and drives to Red Lake Senior High School and opens fire. He kills 7 people at the school, including some teachers and students, and wounds 5 others. The dead included an unarmed security guard at the entrance of the school. But yeah, this was a tragedy. I remember very clearly. I was working, at the Lincoln Journal-Star at the time, and a good friend of mine who's from Red Lake, his name is Dalton Walker, actually got hired as a freelancer for the Washington Post to go back to his reservation. He was living in Phoenix, I believe, at the time. and was paid to go back because they weren't letting any media in. I mean, they had actually set up guards at the border, to prevent national media from coming in. So nobody was getting any news about this. I mean, this was all just very little, trickle of information coming from tribal authorities. So he got to go in there and actually report on this horrendous violence that had occurred at his high school, a place where he had graduated. So it's definitely not something that Native people are exempt from and should ignore. Violence, as we know, is certainly something that Native people deal with constantly, and at disproportionate rates, in almost every area. And we shouldn't rest just because we haven't had a serious mass shooting like that since 2005. It could happen tomorrow, and the way that these mass shootings are increasing in number and intensity. I mean, this is the third worst mass shooting, right after what was it, the second worst? I mean, in Las Vegas. I mean, it's like it's just constant records like that every year now, and what do we do to stop it? Do we really want to arm our teachers? Is that really the solution to this? Is putting a gun in the hands of Mrs. Johnson and my wife, Mrs. Abaresque, who I love, but let's face it. I mean, she's. I can't imagine. Yeah, maybe.
We'll just say you didn't finish your homework.
I'd be more concerned about her
students.
I'd be more concerned about her bringing that gun home one day.
Right? You just got it on there. I told you to finish your homework.
So
please.
I've got 5 children, and they're Native American children. One of them, is half African American, and the idea of sending them to a place where the people who are charged with caring for them are packing heat,
it's crazy.
Is just terrifying to me.
That's
I mean,
ridiculous.
let's face it. I mean, Native people, Black people are targeted at far more disproportionate rates in terms of gun violence by people in authority, police officers, school officials, even. They're punished at a much higher rate than other students within the school system. So now we're going to give them guns and hope that the teachers will do the right thing. Most of them will. I'm not saying teachers are bad. I'm just saying sometimes people lose their cool. They lose their temper and crazy stuff happens. So.
Well, you know what? This was actually a terrorist attack.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And some of them, so some mass shootings can be labeled as a terrorist attack if there's a political what's the word?
Like a motive.
Yeah, political motive behind it. And so this guy was definitely violent, definitely racist, definitely nationalist. Yeah. So he had these motives behind it. So that actually makes this into a terrorist attack. Some of them are not. Like there are a lot of these mass shootings at the schools that are retaliation. A lot of these kids are bullied, alienated, and then they just get to this point where they snap and they go back to school and they decide to retaliate against the whole school because they think the whole world's against them. Yeah. And that's sad.
Yeah, and I get that he's mentally ill. I think anybody who does this sort of thing is mentally ill, but it's interesting how quick we were to label him mentally ill rather than, like you said, a terrorist. We would, if this were a Muslim, if this were any other race really other than a Caucasian, we'd be calling him a terrorist, and saying this was politically motivated. So I think we should be careful about that too. But in any case, I just don't think arming teachers is at all a credible idea. Nobody knows how they're going to act under pressure in that situation. Read an article today about a former, I think he's a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret, but he was in Afghanistan for a couple of years, and he said one of the fiercest firefights he ever got into, he was shot in the leg, and the medic was charged with, saving him and his comrades, froze, during the firefight. This was a guy who had been trained for months and spent, years preparing for this moment. And in that moment, he couldn't move. He couldn't get up. He couldn't bandage anybody. He couldn't help anybody. And this former Special Forces member almost died because of it. Luckily, there was another medic nearby who didn't freeze. But who's to say that our armed teachers aren't going to react poorly in these situations? I think it's probably given most of them will, and I'm worried about kids getting shot, in the crossfire,
Yeah.
getting shot by their own teachers, in these situations. So I don't know. I don't think it's a solution. When we're talking about, weapons of mass destruction like the AR-15 being legal and easier to acquire in this country than over-the-counter medications, I mean, that seems like a heck of a more plausible and effective solution to this problem. But I realize that it's probably not politically feasible, with the hugely powerful gun manufacturers and NRA lobby.
So, I got a story.
Yeah.
And it's about me.
Okay.
I never talk about me.
Never.
Because I'm a humble man.
Yes.
I think I'm like magnificently humble. Like that's how humble I am, actually. Yeah. But okay, so when I lived in Pine Ridge, I lived in a town called Manderson, which is one of the more impoverished towns in Pine Ridge, which is was probably the most impoverished reservation in America.
Cheyenne River actually has a beat right now.
Okay.
But they go back and forth, so next year it could be Pine Ridge again.
So back when I was in Pine Ridge, everyone told me that it was the poorest place.
It was at the time.
And I was living in one of the more impoverished districts, which was Manderson, Wounded Knee District. And I think I was in 3rd grade at the time, or 4th grade. And so I came out of school, and my family's mixed. So we went back to the reservation from Compton, California, and we were called the N-word and treated like we were outcast and bullied a lot, because when you go into a place where it's really dysfunctional and there's a lot of misery, misery loves company. So if they can find an easier target, they'll pick on them. So they picked on me and my brother. And I was the oldest, so I protected my brother a lot. Well, one day I came out of school, and I think there was about 6 or 8 boys around my brother. And so I was always tall, so I was taller than these guys, but we were all in the same grade. Like my brother's 4 years younger than me, and he was, I guess that'd make him, kindergarten, 1st grade. And so I ran over and I kicked one of them in the back. And when I did that, they all turned towards me, and I told my brother to run, and he ran off. And when he ran off, a couple of them tried to run after him, and I ran off to those guys, and they circled back around. And next thing you know, I was in the middle of this circle of guys, and they grabbed me by my braid, and they pulled me down, and they started dragging me by my hair. And while they were one of them was dragging me by my ponytail, the other ones were kicking me, right? And they beat me up pretty good, and then they left me, and they laughed as they walked away. And as I walked home crying that day, I found a knife. So the next day, I took the knife to school, and I saw one of the boys in the hallway. And as soon as I saw him in the hallway, I pulled this knife out, and I started running towards him. And remember, I'm just a little bitty kid at the time, but these guys all beat me up, and I was just so angry. I was so mad about what was going on, because they always teased us. They always messed with us, But this time they had cornered my brother outside, and that was it. Like I couldn't take it anymore, and so I'm chasing him down the hallway, and a teacher notices me, and he grabs me by the back of my shirt, and he yanks me, and the shirt comes up, and it like cuts me in my throat a little bit, and like I'm choking, and he's got me on my tippy toes, and he slaps the knife out of my hand, and I get suspended, and I go home, and I get spanked over it. And the whole time I'm hating the world, and I'm hating the school, and I'm hating all the kids, but I was being bullied so much that I just, at that point, enough was enough. Yeah. And honestly, all I had access to was a knife. Yeah. And so when I think about that, sometimes I think about that when I hear about these shootings, and that could have been me if I had access to a gun. I could have came into that school and been looking for those boys and running around shooting at people. But I didn't have a knife. Yeah. So bullying is a serious thing, and it really can hurt. It really can hurt people, and it really can mess them up long term. For a long time, I was really bitter, and and I just recently started to be able to like release that stuff, and but it's lateral oppression too, because they're miserable for whatever reason, and they're doing this to other people. But in some cases, our society is just turning cold-hearted. And you see your parents doing it, so you actually, as a kid, you go and you emulate that in school, and you treat these other kids this way, and you're going to pick on the weakest one or the one that doesn't have as much support, and that was me at the time. And, I'm 6'6", 250 pounds now. And I feel myself getting really impatient with people who I can tell are abusive or, have predator tendencies, but that's because I still can project those feelings from when I was a kid. But, thinking about this again for the second time or third time or fifth time or 20th time, it always makes me reflect back to that day because in that moment, I didn't feel like I would be doing anything wrong. I felt like, you know what, I need to do this because I got to stand up for myself and I can't let these guys do this no more. But I probably would have been in juvie for, I would have been in the system after that probably the rest of my life just because of that. If I had an opportunity to actually hurt one of those boys or all of them. And, bullying is a big deal and compassion is important. And it's hard. Like on the reservation, when everybody's feeling so downtrodden, like a lot of times they're just like every man for himself type attitudes, and you can see it even in some of the government decisions and, like even with the where they've been taking people off of enrollment, de-enrollment, what's it called?
Disenrollment.
Disenrollment, yeah. So, like that campaign just came up again, but I didn't really see a lot about it this time. Did you?
No. I know it's been happening all over the country in different tribes.
Yeah, they had a disenrollment like movement again, like a day of it, and there was some actors who had came out and some tribal leaders that came out to try to push for this, but it actually didn't have as much of an effect this year as it did the year before.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I guess beyond school shootings, there's plenty of other things to talk about in Indian country. And let me say first, though, I'm glad you didn't have access to it on that day. And,
me too.
And don't hold it, don't punish yourself over it or anything. It's people snap. When you're pushed like that, I was bullied too when I was younger, but not to that extent, but certainly I was. You get tired of it after a while, and you push back eventually. I actually went and learned karate when I was little. I was pretty crap at it, but I was just good enough that I could scare this kid who always wanted to beat me, and actually chased him home from school one day. It was this moment of pure just. What's the word? Redemption. Yeah, absolute redemption.
You could hear the
I can remember every moment of that day. Yeah.
I am the tiger. You chasing him.
Yeah, there's this. I don't know. It's in our nature to want justice, and if we need to go to certain lengths to get it, sometimes we allow ourselves that, and it's not always good.
You know what's funny though? Those kids actually stopped bullying me after that day. Yeah. They would still do little things. They still had animosity towards me, and they teased us a little bit. But none of them ever tried to go that intense with it again.
Well, you're the crazy knife kid, man.
Yeah.
You really established your boundaries.
Yeah,
there,
but when it was happening though, and they grabbed me up, like I'm crying as he's carrying me to the tippy-toeing me to the
further
counselor.
Further proves that you were the crazy knife kid. So,
yeah. It was traumatic.
Yeah.
Life is traumatic, so we got to be able to release that, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else is going on in Indian country right now?
Well, this week, the Donald Trump's nominee for director of the Indian Health Service, an agency that oversees healthcare to 2.2 million Native Americans, his nomination was withdrawn. And I got an email about this from the Department of Health and Human Services yesterday. Very sparse information. All they said was Robert Weaver's nomination. He's no longer basically a candidate for the position. No information as to whether Donald Trump had withdrawn it or whether Robert Weaver, who's a member of the Quapaw Nation of Oklahoma, whether he had in fact withdrawn his own nomination. He's been under fire over the past couple months because the Wall Street Journal has been publishing various reports saying that he misrepresented his employment history, his educational background. They've said that he had serious financial mismanagement problems at his last place of work. But he had described it to the Senate Indian Affairs Committee as if he was this sort of paragon of achievement. So anyway, I mean, there have been a lot of questions about that. Obviously, the Wall Street Journal is a big newspaper. Another issue is that Senator Tom Udall of New Mexico has really taken aim at Robert Weaver and tried to stall this nomination. So that happened yesterday. We got this email saying that he was no longer a candidate for the position. And then today, interestingly enough, Robert Weaver actually sent out a letter to tribal leaders saying that he didn't, voluntarily withdraw. That he was called by somebody with HHS on last Friday afternoon at about 4:00, and the person on the phone tells him as soon as he answers, you have 2 minutes to decide right now whether or not you're going to voluntarily withdraw your nomination, or you're going to have to face a very public, very humiliating procedure where we'll have to, force your withdrawal. And so he had 2 minutes to decide. He decided to withdraw. He regretted that decision, he said. A lot of tribal leaders had said they supported him, but a lot of tribal leaders didn't. The ones who didn't, haven't really said much publicly, but we've certainly heard from them as well at Indians.com. And so that's interesting. I mean, this is the first time that a nominee for IHS director has ever had their nomination fail like this, or fail at all. And it's sort of symptomatic of the whole Donald Trump administration. And, it seems like very few of his nominations are going through very easily, if they go through at all. There's so many positions open right now within the federal government like this, because he either isn't making nominations or his nominations are just not very good. I'm not going to necessarily take an opinion as to whether Robert Weaver was any good or not. I'll certainly say that the Wall Street Journal's reporting was very credible, very substantial, and so anyway, I guess I'll just leave it at that. But certainly an interesting turn of events there.
So
in
I
any
wonder,
case, yeah.
I wonder what. So he was nominated.
He was nominated, to oversee Donald Trump.
By Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So Donald Trump, he's native, right?
Robert Weaver.
Robert
yes.
Weaver's native.
Mm-hmm.
So Donald Trump actually nominated a native to head a native.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Agency. That's actually kind of shocking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder, what is going on in Donald Trump's head. Is it him, or maybe the Russians like natives?
Yeah. That could be.
Because why else would they
Mm-hmm.
nominate Robert Weaver?
Uh-huh.
Maybe the Russians have seen Dances with Wolves.
Mm-hmm. If they don't like natives, I think we're probably up there on their list as far as who to target our podcast.
Oh, yeah. They're coming for us.
Yeah.
So did you hear that Adam Beach was in town?
I did hear that. Yeah, I didn't get to make it.
Last Friday?
I was out of town.
Yeah. He was at the John Trudell lecture.
Yeah.
It was pretty... I didn't get to go myself, but I saw a lot of posts about it, and everybody was real happy to meet him and stuff, After he made that movie Hostiles just recently. That was a really good movie. I liked it.
Yeah, it was
He had a good part in that movie, too.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish maybe I'll try to find some video on his lecture, see how it went.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Yeah, they Facebook Lived it. I just haven't had a chance to go back and watch it. I've heard him speak before. And he's certainly a good speaker and great actor.
You know who else is a good speaker?
Who?
This guy right here.
Oh, yeah? The Humble Man?
The Humble Man. That's what I'm going to call my speaking tour?
Yeah.
The Humble Man.
The Humble Man lecture series.
So I didn't tell you this, but I actually got asked to come back to Sweden this year.
Oh, uh-huh.
April. They want me to come back in April, actually.
Cool.
So I'm going to go there, and I'm going to promote this TP art project I got going on.
Mm-hmm.
So we got this project going right now in Lincoln where they have these different art sculptures that they put out every few years, and they did these hearts, and they did these bicycles for these different organizations, and they did light bulbs. These are 6-foot statues, and they did 90 of each one of these themes.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna do 50 of 6-foot teepees and structures, and then have them painted. And I've been talking about it a lot, but I haven't actually been able to get it going because I don't have funding yet for it.
Yeah. But
it's an amazing idea. Everybody's on board. But here's the kicker. and you heard it first on the podcast. So I'm actually suing the city of Lincoln and the Lincoln Police Department because they marched my niece out of the house in her underwear with no shoes or pants on.
And those of you who subscribe to this channel
have heard about this,
heard
probably.
This, yeah.
To interrogate her and my brother, who has a learning disability. They were interrogating him for hours, telling him he's lying until they tell him what they want to hear. Well, that's an ultra-sensitive minor, and that's a disabled person. You're not supposed to do that, all right? And then when I told them that they were doing these things unlawfully, they arrested me. You're not supposed to do that. I have a First Amendment right. I have Fourth Amendment rights. I've been researching this stuff, and so I made up this federal complaint, civil complaint, and I handed it in just today, actually. So we're going to see if that puts a monkey wrench into my city art project, but it's already been publicly talked about, so we'll see how it works out. It's going to be controversial, but honestly, the way I feel is, and I've said this a million times, my size, like, you know, I'm a bigger guy, and these officers.
Big guy.
Yeah, I'm a
big guy.
I'm a big guy.
Yeah.
And these officers that were at the house, these were all smaller men that were out of shape, and you know, they had complete control because they could kill me. You know, they got guns on their hips, and I was thinking, if I met these guys in the forest, none of us had weapons on us, they would not be messing with my niece. They would not be trying to like bully us. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be that circle of boys pulling me by my hair and kicking me. No, it would not. But because of the system set up the way it is, that gives them the authority to be able to abuse us. Well, that's unlawful. Okay, and so I'm not gonna sit back for it. You know, if they would have just only like cuffed me up for something and you know, kind of just been bullied to me, like I probably would have let it go. I probably wouldn't have pushed it this far. But when you do it to my niece and you do it to my little brother, who's, you know, he has his own issues that he's struggling with himself, you know, that's when I had to draw the line. And that's when I had to pull this out. And you know, this is stuff I'm going to talk about in Sweden too, because they love hearing about what's happening in America, and they love hearing about real life struggles. You know, they hear about a lot of this more publicized stuff, but to hear from somebody who's actually living in America and living like a modest lifestyle, you know, because I don't have a lot of money or I don't have a lot of fame, they find those stories really interesting. You know, Adam Beach, though, I'm sure he has some amazing stories too, because not only does he act, and he's very successful at it, you know, he does a lot of things for the community, and he's also an activist in his own right. So, you know, I'm actually really interested in hearing what he says, but I'm excited about going back to Sweden in April as well, because that's only 2 months away, but they just sprung it on me. Oh, also Nako's going to be there. Do you know who Nako is? Nako's a musician. He's actually a really famous musician. And then Chase Iron Eyes is going to be in Sweden too at the same time, but he's going to a different area. So I probably won't see him. I may not see Nako either because he's doing a concert there, but who knows? Yeah. Maybe we can travel sometime as the podcast. That'd be awesome. Or maybe we can figure out how to do a remote podcast from there when we start. And you know what a really good interview would be? The Sami people. Have you heard about the Sami? The Sami is basically one of the last indigenous white people of Europe. Like these people, they reminded me of natives. Like they have the same issues we have. They're reindeer, they're reindeer herders in the northern Scandinavia, and they cross like 3 different borders when they on these herding cycles that they do with their reindeer, and they have treaties just like we do. And so now the government is actually breaking the treaties with these Sami people, and they're taking their land there that they usually herd their reindeers in, and they're mining them for these different I think it's ore is the main thing that they're pulling out of this area. But they're clear cutting these forests to mine this area. They have a town that they mined right next to this town for a long time, and the town actually started to collapse in on itself, so they had to move everybody out of the town. But they're also dealing with alcoholism like we are. They're also dealing with displacement just like we are. So let's say you're a Sami, right? And if you go to the city and you don't dress like the rest of the Sami people back home, back north, you're white, so you look just like every modern colonized white person. But if you're in the Sami territory and you dress like the Sami and you drum on the same kind of drums as us as natives, their songs, their vocal songs are just like ours. You seem like indigenous people. Like you can tell they have an indigenous tribal type culture still that they're not emulating anybody else. They've had this for thousands of years. So those would be great people for us to actually interview and talk to about their struggles, because they mirror what we're going through, and they look at us and they kind of relate to what's happening. A lot of them went to Standing Rock to support, and then they actually helped shut down the Nordea Bank, which was funding the well, they didn't shut it down, they just forced them to divest from Energy Transfer Partners Dakota Access Pipeline. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, but that would be a good podcast for us to do.
Just listening, man. Yeah, that's what I do, apparently.
Yeah. Right? Leo, you're going to be quiet so I can talk?
Lord.
Are you done yet? So we can talk about important stuff? What else you got?
So over the past few weeks, I've been able to get to work on a kind of a, I consider an uplifting story about the Winnebago Tribe's efforts to increase homeownership on its reservation. And
that is a good story.
Yeah. So between 2000 and 2013, the tribe has managed to increase homeownership by 4.6%. During that same time period, the state of Nebraska only saw a 1.2% increase in homeownership. This is a reservation we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I mean that's unheard of. To even have an increase in homeownership is incredible. How did the tribe do it? I mean, so one of the big things they do is they have this down payment assistance program that provides tribal members up to $65,000 per purchase of a home on the reservation. The tribe actually constructs the homes. The tribe owns the land. The tribe, is the largest employer by far, and not just tribal jobs, not just government jobs, but a lot of really high paying contract jobs. The tribe does a lot of contract work for the federal government, and they need people to run these operations, and so they have a lot of really educated people, very talented people who work there, and then those people need places to live. So it all makes sense as to why they do this. This program has actually helped 52 families get into new homes, and it's dispersed $2.3 million in housing assistance, down payment assistance to its tribal members. So I think that's pretty incredible. Anyway, it's just one of the various things that the tribe is trying to do to really rebuild. It's kind of, let's face it, just poverty-stricken community.
Yeah.
And it's been very effective. I mean,
economic redevelopment is a key for us to actually start to heal a lot of our other issues as well. It's like, how can we fix some of this or heal from some of this historical trauma if we're constantly struggling and we're in this impoverished state of despair, and luckily, and I appreciate this, like you took me with you when you actually interviewed that one family, and and that woman was, she was really proud to be able to have her home, and she had a huge backyard that was fenced in, and she took us and showed us, and you could just see the pride and just the feeling of happiness that she had in being able to own her own home when she never thought it possible, and I thought that was amazing, and it's amazing what Winnebago does. I really want to start looking into maybe seeing what some of the other tribes that have resources like that are doing with their economics too, because I think that's super important for rebuilding ourselves. And then I also like the way that some tribes are even buying back land, and then getting it designated. But see, also getting it designated in trust. Like, what do you think about that?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
Okay, so let's say for a tribe to go and buy some land and then they turn it into trust land. So how does that work? Is that going to be
they don't
the
always
trust?
turn it into trust land. So like one of the things that's kind of interesting about what Winnebago's done is they've bought back some of their former tribal lands, but they haven't made it all trust land because it's actually easier to build these homes on non-trust land. It's easier to get lending.
Right.
A lot of banks don't want to provide lending or approve mortgages for people who are going to build on trust land because they don't understand trust land. You know how it works, and
well, trust land does make it a little volatile because the tribe owns the land that your house is on. Mm-hmm. So
federal government, really, but I mean the tribe certainly owns it. But
so then they could actually make you move your house or lose it, move it or lose it. Yeah, and that would be horrific. But at the same time, like that would have to be something pretty extreme for that to happen. Yeah. And you can lose a house on any other soil as well if you do the wrong things. You know, it's like, yeah, do we own this house? Well, you have to pay taxes on it forever, and if you don't pay those taxes, then it gets taken from you. So, really, do we own houses? You know?
Yeah, I mean, you can own the building itself, but I mean, what does that matter if you don't own the land? You know?
Well, even if you own the building, you still have to pay taxes on it. And if you stop paying those taxes, the government takes it. So it's like you really don't own it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a lot of problems that the tribe has had to really overcome. I mean, so many tribal members in Winnebago didn't have very good credit history.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that the tribe decided it needed to do was to build up that credit history by buying a used car business and then selling used cars to its tribal members, because that was one way to build up people's credit, was to have them, make payments on a car.
Yeah. Establish a payment history. That's good, man. I mean, Lance Morgan, he's doing good things over there. Yeah. And, he went to Harvard and came back to the reservation and basically just, took all of his knowledge and helped rebuild his people. And that's amazing. And I give him a lot of props for that, because that we need to see a lot more of that. And the fact that they're openly doing this and other tribes can kind of emulate their success is a really good thing too. It's like you don't have to always reinvent the wheel. Yeah. If you see somebody else doing it, figure out what they're doing and just go ahead and emulate what they're doing. Yeah. That's how I feel about it. Winnebago's doing pretty good. I appreciate all the hard work they're doing to revitalize their community.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And their hospital. Yep. So are they do you know when they're going to take the hospital over?
June 1st.
June 1st. Okay, so this summer.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to see much change there once they do it. It's going to be
gradual.
Yeah, it's going to be very gradual, because right now they don't even have the ability to get Medicaid or Medicare funding for their patients. Because they lost their certification to do that from the federal government. They didn't actually. Indian Health Service did, because that's the agency that's currently operating the hospital there. This is why they want to take it over, so that they can manage their own hospital and get that certification back and get that funding back, so that they can really offer the kind of services they want. Yeah.
Punkah Tribe, though, they're doing good.
Yeah, as far as their healthcare, I mean, a lot of things too, but I mean, certainly, their healthcare, they've got quite a very interesting and effective model.
Yeah, I really like their current Fred Leroy clinic. It's a small clinic, and it's in their Punkah Center, and they also have a dental there as well. And the building itself is old, and it's not immaculate, but it's really nice. Like it's not a bad place to go, and you don't feel like you're going into some place that's not kept up. But they actually are going to be building this huge complex, and people are going to be able to go get these services from them, and it's going to be pretty high tech too. Yeah. And they had some resistance, though. They had some when they went to the planning board to get this approved. The neighbors was a cabinet maker, and
Otis, his name is. All right.
And he was concerned because they were going to put a sweat lodge on the premises, just like they have at the current Fred Leroy Punkah Center Health and Wellness. So they're going to put a TV. They're going to put a TV on a sweat lodge. Excuse me, a sweat lodge on the property. and he was concerned because he looked online, and he said that you
Red
come
flag.
out of the, you come out of the sweat lodge and you got to go into a river, and we don't have no rivers.
So where are they going to run into? They're naked in there
Yeah.
too. You said, he's
Yeah.
like, and they're naked in there, in birthday suits, and they got to go run into a river right afterward.
So he thinks everybody's going to come out of the sweat lodge and be running around the parking lot looking for a river to jump into.
I'd like to find out what website he read this crap on.
That was some funny stuff.
Oh, that was good.
But he doesn't want to be surrounded by Indians, and he's about to be.
Yeah.
They're going
terrifying
to have to circle
idea,
the
isn't it?
wagon. They're going to be circling the wagons on him, on this cabinet maker.
Yeah.
And he wasn't going for it, but they approved it anyway, so
They
he
did.
just got to deal with it.
Omaha City Council okayed it, and now they're moving forward with this massive
Yeah.
purchase of this, over 130,000 square foot building that the Ponkas are going to use for their clinic and their tribal offices. It's going to allow them to expand their health services dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
They plan to start providing services not only to tribal members and the Native Americans in general, but non-Indians eventually
the public
too.
in general, general public.
I mean, why? So we have this idea about Indian healthcare that it should only serve Indians. At least some people think that. But if we really want to make some money in this effort and use that money then to benefit our own tribal members, I mean, why don't we establish healthcare centers that serve everybody? I mean, look at some of the healthcare centers in our city of Lincoln and anywhere really. They're some of the most profitable, some of the most wealthy companies and organizations in our communities. And why couldn't tribal facilities be the same way, especially if they're in a high population area like Omaha, Nebraska? This hospital is going to be this clinic's going to be right dead center of Omaha, Nebraska, a city of well over 1 million people. So the opportunities for them are just boundless, and I like the idea that they seem to want to harness that.
Yeah, I think so too. It makes me happy.
Yeah.
And then one of the guy's complaints too, which he got corrected by the planning board, was that they were going to bring the property value down. Like, what? These are big right now. This is an industrial area that's not being used.
It's been vacant for 6 years.
Yeah. So okay, how is this? How is somebody building an elaborate medical facility going to bring down your property value?
It's not. Period.
Yeah. The guy said the guy on the planning board said, because he's actually in real estate investment. He's like, well, what you don't realize is your property value is going to go up because they moved in next door because of your neighbors. You should be thanking them for coming. And he couldn't get it because he just didn't want people running around looking for a river butt naked. A bunch of Indians. I should do that. I should go do that. I should go run around in front of his store like, where's the river? I'm coming out of the sweat lodge. That's funny.
Oh, man.
They were like, oh, no, I knew it. I knew it was going to happen. I'd probably get arrested. That ruined my podcast career.
Well, one more thing maybe to talk about, or maybe you have something else too, but it's kind of an interesting case, I guess, that happened this week. The U.S. Supreme Court decided not to hear an appeal of an Indian Child Welfare Act lawsuit filed by a conservative think tank called the Goldwater Institute. The Goldwater Institute had championed the cause of the family of 3 girls whose parents were killed in a December 2015 crash in California. They're non-natives, the relatives of these 3 girls. Now they're fighting the tribe that the girls' parents belong to, the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians, for custody of these girls. And so they have been fighting this for many years, and then finally they decided to appeal it, the latest decision, to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court, without much comment, just rejected that petition, thereby ending the case. And there was only a very brief, explanation for that. One of the justices just said that this is an Indian Child Welfare Act case, therefore falls under this federal law designed to give tribes the right to say what happens to their children. That's all there is to it. The tribe has the right to be involved in the decisions regarding custody of these 3 girls. Obviously, this family, non-native family, didn't like that. And I never want to be too harsh in these situations, because I don't know exactly what's going on. I don't know what the girls want. I don't know, what the tribe is thinking of doing with the girls. I'm not assuming that they're going to take them away from their non-native family. That's always sort of the assumption, is that the tribe's just going to strip them from their non-native family and put them, in some home with 13 kids, on the reservation. That's not always the case. Oftentimes the tribe just decides to allow the children to remain with their non-Indian relatives, but they want to have the ability, the tribe wants to have the ability to
interact with
remove them from that situation if they don't like it. I mean, maybe
Right.
the girls get abused by their non-Indian relatives for whatever reason, or so the tribe wants that power, I guess, to just ensure that their children are taken care of. So I don't think it's always safe to assume that it's the worst thing whenever a tribe has this kind of power. At the same time, I also don't think that it's necessarily right to remove them completely from their relatives, even if they aren't native. So I don't like the idea that maybe the tribe could decide to not give these non-Indian relatives some kind of at least visitation. But so I'm kind of torn on this issue, and I don't want to make any assumptions about it. I just certainly think it's interesting that this conservative think tank has been fighting this Indian Child Welfare Act for many years, decided to pursue this case in particular.
So I spoke last week at a Introduction to Native Studies class, right, at UNL, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and I think it was 30 or maybe 35 students in there. And so the first thing I did was I pulled out my hand drum and I said, hey, I like to sing because it brings up the spiritual energy in the room. How many of you have heard a Lakota song live? And 3 people in the room raised their hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, this is part of our territory. This is Omaha territory, but before that, it's Pawnee, and the Lakota used to travel through this area too. We weren't really stationed here, but our songs should be known by the people that live in this, occupy this area. You should actually have some experience with the people that lived here before. Well, I kind of feel like because our culture has been systematically targeted to destroy, I feel like those children do need a connection to their native culture, because the system itself had created this disconnect, and that's what's one of the problems that we're having right now to today. And I remember I was looking on Facebook the other day, I was scrolling, and there was this letter. It was like an old letter from the 1800s, and I don't know the validity of the letter actually, but the letter was from this either orphanage or missionary school that had native kids, and they had sold this kid to this family for $10, and they were talking about the kid in a way that sounded sexual, like they could like you can do whatever you want to this kid. Thank you for your contribution of $10. You can do what you want with this kid. And so it's just sick to think of, like, the things that we've been through, and now our kids are still lost, and they're still struggling, and they're still having problems, and having that connection to the tribe, I think, is important.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you're right. Like some of the cases should be decided by the circumstances that they're in currently. If you have some loving family members, like you have a sister-in-law or something, or a sister that's a white, or an aunt that's white, or someone that loves you, that's been in your life your whole life, and something tragic happened to your parents, they shouldn't rip you away from that family member to keep you connected, but they should obligate that person to actually keep you connected to your tribe as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's I mean, they are required by law to do that, but at the same time, I don't know that state courts really enforce that to any great degree.
Because they don't care.
They don't care. But
one thing in my my lawsuit I just filed was an injunctive relief, which means excuse me, I need some water. Well, injunctive relief means that that there has to be something done to fix the problem. So one of my injunctive relief that I asked for was that the City of Lincoln and the Lincoln Police Department start to work with the 5 tribes that are connected to Nebraska, the Lincoln Indian Center, the Commission on Indian Affairs, and me personally, to generate more cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, some recruitment, and promoting Native people to actually join into the police force in order to add some diversity to the police force, because all the police officers that were there were all white.
Yeah.
There wasn't one Native in the group.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually called a white person to come and advocate for me. And when that white person came, that's when they released my niece to her to let my niece go inside to put clothes
You mean
on.
your caretaker, right?
Right. So, and then...
That's what they
also,
think. They think that the white people in our lives are our caretakers.
Yeah.
You know, we can't function without them.
But,
they're here now. We can release custody.
And it's crazy
That's
because
crazy.
they uncuffed me when she got there.
Yeah.
Like, everything changed.
It's insane.
But if she wouldn't have showed up, they would have probably been messing with us for hours or at least another hour. But, they need to know that there needs to be more people in the police force that can tell them, hey, you guys, don't treat them like that.
Yeah.
They're human beings too. Look at me. Because if you can look at your partner and your partner's looks like Kevin,
Okay,
then you might not bully the family that looks like Kevin,
Then again, no.
Unless you just don't like Kevin as a partner, then you might bully him on purpose. It might backfire. But I'm thinking we try it. I'm thinking we try to get some more diversity into the police force, because that's the way you fix things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We got to get some of those judges to be native, so that when the kids come in front of them, they can actually relate. Mm-hmm. So if the state courts don't care because they don't relate to us, well, that doesn't change anything. Mm-hmm. So that's my rant. I felt bad about last week. So if you
that
guys,
was such a tragedy.
if you guys have watched last week's podcast, we had a great man on the show.
Oh, incredible speaker and just one of the wisest people I know. Just such deep wisdom. Frank Lemire. Yeah,
he's an amazing man.
Yeah,
he's an eloquent speaker too.
Absolutely.
I think he's one of the best speakers I've ever seen.
Yeah, definitely.
But he was here, and my microphone was not working right.
And my microphone wasn't connected to the camera the right way, so we didn't get good audio on any of our devices.
Yeah.
So sincere apologies for that. Such an oversight considering our interview subject last week. Apologies, but you can still hear it. You just got to put your headphones on and turn the volume up.
And it's a work in progress,
Yeah,
because now we're gonna do sound checks from now on.
Yeah,
and we
we've
had
got a
already talked
checklist.
about it. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
gonna talk. We talked about it before, but we're gonna make sure that we do sound checks.
Yeah.
That way, people can actually hear us clearly, and the volumes at the right levels, and it's just gonna grow, and it's gonna.
Yeah.
The our editing abilities are gonna get better, and we're gonna be able to add music and add
Videos.
clips and,
I mean, we could now actually. I just
you're
finally
busy
got
man.
I finally got some software to allow me to do that. Before I was just using some very basic software on my camera itself, and just wasn't enough to really do much. So I do plan to do that.
Cool. Mm-hmm. Do you have time?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Some weeks.
Some weeks you're really busy. Yeah.
No.
Didn't you do like 6 stories in a week last week, or was it the week before?
It was the week before, but this week is shaping up pretty similarly. Not in the terms of that many stories, but just bigger, more complex stories. So.
Yeah, and the thing about those stories is, it's not just you sitting for an hour writing up a story. Like, you have to investigate this information. You have to
go out and talk to people a lot of times. The housing story we talked about. I mean, you were there when I did the reporting on that.
We had to travel 2 hours one way for that.
Yeah.
That's 4 hours of driving.
Yeah, and talk to 6 different people there in the community, and then interview people over the phone when I came back. I mean, so it just depends. Some weeks are crazier than others. Yeah, but I'd love to put more production value into this and hope to.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And I plan on making a TP specifically for our podcast, too, that we can...
Oh, don't ruin that surprise, man.
Oh, man. Never mind.
You didn't hear it.
Yeah, never mind. I didn't say that.
Bleep.
You didn't hear that. We're going to have to edit that out since he has the software now. You know, we're not
I can
using
do
the
that.
phone
Yeah.
software.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't know what you're missing from Leo. It's just not there. You know, there's a lot missing from this podcast that you'll never hear.
Probably
does not belong in the ears.
It's probably true. He's probably like, oh, that's annoying. Cut.
Done.
Cut that. Yeah. Oh, here he goes again. Cut that. He thinks he's funny. Cut that. That's not funny. You funny? He talks to his screen when he's cutting me out of stuff. He's like talking to me like
looking in the mirror.
Yeah.
Son of a bitch. Who gives a crap about the Sami people, man?
Yeah,
Why are we talking about this? I've never even heard of the Sami people. Why do I got to listen to this for 20 minutes?
You guys look into them. I'm telling you.
Don't look into
it's
them.
Very
Nobody cares
interesting.
about the Sami people. Don't
That's
do
sad because that's what they say about us. Look at this oppressor over here.
Lateral oppression, man.
There he goes
Lateral
again.
oppression.
Just because they're Washichu.
I'm being oppressed. I'm being oppressed. You ever see that Monty Python movie?
Oh, yeah. It's been a long time. Man.
So, I apologize. I do care about the Sami people a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we got a compliment about Frank's podcast last week.
Yeah.
The compliment was, and this is funny. This is funny, Missy. The compliment was that we stayed quiet while he talked, and they thought that was good.
Oh, good. You know, I mean, we're both, I think, been raised by some pretty traditional people.
Mm-hmm.
And when somebody like that takes their time to come and talk to you and share what they've learned in their vast experience with you, I mean, you shut up and listen, man.
Yeah.
So.
You give them their respect.
Absolutely.
You know, that they've earned, because he's earned his respect.
Yeah.
He's paid his dues.
Yeah, and he's still paying his dues.
Yeah, he's been on the front lines for years.
Yeah.
Before I thought about it.
Yeah.
Back then when I thought Big Macs was the most important thing in my life after work. Or a beer.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah.
But
We have no illusions here on the show. I mean, we're nothing really. You know, we're pitiful people. But we're glad you join us each week, and thank you so much for listening. And I hope you can get something out of this, at least, if only just.
It's not a good laugh.
Yeah.
All right. Well.
All right.
I want to tell everybody thank you and Doksha. Until next time.
All right.
Appreciate you guys tuning in, and appreciate you guys giving us feedback too. That really helps.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.